Hi, and welcome back to another part in my guitar lesson series. For any of my viewers who've watched my previous lesson videos, you'll notice that, to give a quick rundown, I started off the first lesson on my channel by talking about how we could get a mastery of the fingerboard and knowing our notes. I did that for a very specific reason because I had planned to do more lessons in a very particular order. I followed that up by talking about mastering the pentatonic scales, where if you go back and watch those videos, I talk about not only learning the pentatonic scales over the whole fretboard, but also about some concepts to get us playing within them in a different manner. Now, the pentatonic scale is such an important scale. I love using it, but it's also one of those scales that has been used, maybe overused, right, in rock, pop, jazz, blues music. So this part of the next part of the series, which I'm labeling Demystifying the Modes, is hopefully going to take us to a new place with our pentatonic scales. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about pentatonic scales when I'm talking about modes, but you're going to see I'm trying to come up with kind of a different approach to utilizing modes than is oftentimes taught, and hopefully this is going to give us a different way to think about them. So let's start off by talking about what a mode actually is. I know through all the years that I've been teaching, that's one of the questions that I got a lot. What are these modes we hear about and I read about? And people come in scratching their head about them. And that's why I'm kind of calling this series Demystifying the Modes, because it seems to be this sort of uncertainty about what they are and how they can be used. And it really doesn't have to be that. And hopefully with what I'm going to show you over the next few videos, it's going to clear up a lot of these questions that we potentially might have. A lot of people already know this stuff. And again, that's probably not the videos for you. So although I am going to talk about kind of a different angle and approach to modes, so there could be something for everybody in this video series as well. So let's answer the first question. What is a mode? Well, a mode in its the simplest part of the definition of what a mode is a mode is just a scale. There's really nothing more complex about it than that, but then obviously that brings up the next question, then why don't we just call it a scale? So to finish that definition, we would really have to call a mode a scale that is derived from another scale, or a parent scale, let's call it, okay? So the most common modes out there they're the most famous ones that we've heard of are based off of what we call the major scale. Okay, so you may have heard names like the following thrown around: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Well, those are the modes, the 7 modes of the major scale. The first one, Ionian, is simply just the pure major scale. That's mode number 1, and that's something we've all heard before, right? So that's the Ionian mode, or what we just call, I played the C major scale. We're going to be dealing with the key of C major just because of the lax and sharps and flats for now. And these can all be obviously moved to different keys, and we should learn them in different keys as we need them. So my definition then that it's just a scale, but it's a scale that's derived from another scale, still leaves a little bit of confusion, because we kind of just go, okay, well, how is it derived from it? How does it differ, and why do we need to know them? One of the biggest points of confusion for me years and years ago when I was first trying to learn these as a beginning guitar player was in the way it was always described back then in books and literature that was trying to teach the modes. They would give us this basic explanation. They would say, okay, we have our C major scale, right, which I just played. Okay, and that, fine. We can all sit there and learn that until we can play it quite effortlessly. But then they would say, okay, so the second mode of the C major scale means we'll take those same notes, but instead of starting them on C and ending on C, we're going to start that same sequence of notes on D and end it on D. Now, you'll notice right away it has a different tonal quality to it, and that's because by starting and ending on D, we've tricked our ear and the listener's ear into hearing a different, what I like to refer to as a tonal center, right? So because we're not hearing the C first, which gets our ear focused on that note, now that I focus on this D for a moment, our ear gets pulled into that. When I play the same sequence of notes, it has a different sound to it. Okay. So that description is perfectly correct and perfectly accurate, but what I found about most literature is it just kind of left it at that. And that's what the confusing part was, because you'd walk away and going, okay, so I already know this major scale, maybe over a couple octaves, maybe over the whole fretboard. But I still was always wondering, okay, well, how does it really change just because I start and end on a D or an E within that scale? It's still just the same sequence of notes. And what my ultimate goal was to be able to solo and create melodic ideas around these notes from the scale. So I thought the starting and ending points seem somewhat irrelevant, other than, okay, if I start here, I am sort of, tuning the listener's ear into a new tonal center, but I'm not always going to be starting there. I don't want to start every solo I play in the key of C on the note C necessarily. Maybe I want to focus on a different chord tone or focus on a different note, right? I didn't seem to want to be painted into that corner of like, why do I always have to start and end on a particular note? Well, the answer is we don't. The proper explanation to it really is what makes these particular series of notes a mode is not so much the note that we start and end on, but what we're playing it over top of harmony-wise or chord-wise, right? So really, in and of itself, when I'm playing a sequence of notes, whether it be here, wherever it is, until I put a chord underneath it or perform those notes over top of a harmony or a chord, it's really not going to have any proper modal definition or a mode defined. That's how I like to think of it, and I find that makes it a little easier to get our head around this. So having said that, if I play this sequence of notes, and what I'm going to do here, obviously, I was going to set up a loop, right? I didn't really have time to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in after and overdub a chord underneath the scale patterns that I'm playing here, so you can hear the difference in the sound of the scale played over top of different chords, right? So if I was to play the C major scale notes with sort of a droning C major chord in the background, it's going to have a certain sound to it. Now, if I play that over top of a D minor or a D minor 7th chord, even if I just play this and get that chord into your ear, now, obviously, if I do land on a D, it helps to give it to accentuate that tonal center. And oftentimes when we are soloing, we do want to focus on the chord tones that we're playing over top of. So I'm playing it over D minor. So really, depending on what the chord is underneath what I'm playing, that's what's really going to define what mode I'm playing over top of. So really, if I was playing a chord progression where I was playing from a C, C, A minor to an F, back to a C, every time I switch chords, if I'm just sticking with that C major scale, every time I switch chords, our ear is going to be hearing a different mode because it's going to actually be played over top of a different harmony or a different chord, if that makes sense. Now, hopefully that's a good explanation for that. Now, that's not the purpose. That was more of an introduction to what the modes actually are. The good news is you say, well, good, so if I learn one scale pattern or one set of scale patterns over the whole fretboard, I really know all of the modes, and that's absolutely accurate. We just got to know where to apply them, right? Which is, another large task as well. But what if I told you that with a lot of the knowledge you already have, just from your own learning of pentatonic scales or from the previous series of lessons I did, and if you don't feel comfortable with the pentatonic series, please, I'll put the video links in the description. Please go back and check out my last series and get really comfortable with those, because a lot of the concepts I talked about there and a lot of the information that's given in those videos is what's going to help us to take this to a new level, okay? What if I told you we could just take what we already know with pentatonic scales and come up with kind of a new and interesting way of dealing with the modes that's going to be much less intimidating maybe and much less work. We can take a framework we already have and feel very comfortable with and just add these tones and notes in that are going to kind of modalize or turn the pentatonic scale into modes, okay? So let's talk about that. Well, I mentioned the 6 modes before, and what I said, it was Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. In this series, we're not going to be talking too much about Locrian, and that's because it has its own kind of interesting tonality to it. It's kind of based around a half-diminished tonality. So we'll kind of put that on the shelf for now. But if we take the remaining 6, what we have is we have 3 of them that are major modes and 3 of them which are minor modes, meaning 3 of them are going to be played over major chords and 3 of them are going to be played over minor chords, okay? So the major modes are Ionian, or mode 1, Lydian, mode 4, and Mixolydian, mode 5, okay? The minor modes will be modes 2, 3, and 6. Number 2, Dorian, number 3, Phrygian, and number 6, Aeolian. Okay. For this particular video today, I'm going to be breaking this down into pairs of modes, and you're going to see why as we go through and discuss the different pairs of modes. But we're going to break it into talking about Ionian and Aeolian, number 1 and number 6 today, okay? Now, there's good reason for that, because basically if we're talking about a C major scale, or like I just said, we can call it C Ionian, right? Wherever we decide to play that. We want to know those all over the fretboard. Now, we haven't discussed those patterns, and for good reason. I'm going to simplify these. There is always what we call relative major and relative minor when we're discussing a major key or a major scale. So the relative minor of C major is A minor. And this is something you can probably find online theory-wise. Every major key has a relative minor key. The key of G major, the relative minor is E minor. The key of D major, the relative minor is B minor, and so on and so forth. That's not really what I'm getting into here. But there is an easy way to figure this out anyways, simply using our guitar and what we already know. Let's go to the root pattern of our pentatonic scale, okay? Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, please go back and watch my pentatonic videos. So the root pattern of an A minor pentatonic would start here on the note A, 5th fret, 6th string. What a lot of people know, and a lot of people also don't seem to understand and know, is that this is not just the A minor pentatonic scale. It's also the C major pentatonic scale. Now, that note here, the second note that I use in this root pattern, where my 4th finger, starting on the 4th finger, is the note C. So really, when we take our root pattern, this gives us an interesting piece of information. When we start on our 1st finger, this is our minor pentatonic. When we start it on the 4th finger, or the second note of that pentatonic, that's denoting the root note of the major pentatonic. Minor. Major. I don't know if you heard the sound difference, even among my flub notes in there. When I was kind of accentuating the A notes and the A minor chord, the scale took on a darker tonality, and with the major side of the chords, when I was playing the C major and focusing on the notes C as my tonal center, it took on more of a happy sound almost, right? And that's the description of major and minor that we'll hear a lot of times. Minor sounds sad, major sounds happy, right? So really what we have here is kind of another way to think of modes just within the pentatonic scale. We have one set of scale patterns we know, but it's really two scales. It's A minor pentatonic and it's C major pentatonic. So those are the relative major and minor. So let me play the scale for you, and I'm going to overdub a chord underneath after so that you can hear it, what it sounds like with each tonality. So let me play it over top of an A minor chord now. Now let me play a C major chord and the scale over top of that. Okay. Your ear, you notice you automatically gravitate towards wanting to land back on whatever the root note of the chord that's being played underneath it. Now that you can also get into more chord tones. For instance, an A minor chord has the notes A, C, and E in it. So any one of those notes could be the one that you get drawn into playing, but the strongest one is always going to be the number one or the root note, right? So if you're hearing an A minor, you're always going to end up wanting to kind of resolve back to that A, and if it's C major, you're going to want to resolve back to that C. But I think you can hear from that how the same set of notes we have, right, regardless of where we play them, is going to have a very different sound depending on what chord is underneath it. Okay, so great. Without having to learn anything else, if we know our 5 pentatonic patterns that cover the fretboard, like I've talked about in my other video series, we already know A minor pentatonic, we know C major pentatonic. Okay, but that's stuck with the pentatonic. We can't really get much more modal based off of that because we don't have enough notes, the pentatonic being a 5-note scale. To really dive into the notes of the major scale is a 7-note scale. So the good news is, though, we already know 5 of those notes, right? The A minor pentatonic contains 5 of the 7 notes that the A minor scale or Aeolian mode contains. The C major pentatonic contains 5 of the 7 notes that the C major or C Ionian mode is going to have within it. If we're very, very comfortable playing with the pentatonic scale, and most of us are, because it seems to be one of the scales that so many folks learn right off the bat, right? Why throw that all away and say, okay, now I'm going to go learn a whole series of scale patterns for the C major scale or for the A minor scale? We already have 5/7 of it memorized within our pentatonic scale. And arguably even the best notes, or the ones that are going to have the highest success, highest chance of success for sounding good over almost any chord, which is within the key we're playing. So the pentatonic scale is a great tool to have under our belt. Well, what if I said we can just take that, simply add the necessary notes to it to create other modes, still thinking in our head pentatonic, but knowing particularly which other color notes, we'll call them, that we can add in, and then we can put those in when we feel it's musically necessary or relevant, if that makes sense. So let me give you an example. If we were, and this is why I was working in the key of C, if we are to take the C major pentatonic scale, the notes are C, D, E, G, A, back to C. So anybody who knows the first 7 letters of their alphabet can quickly figure out which letters are missing, right? C, D, E, everything's fine, right? Well, maybe C, D, E, okay, so C, D, E, G. Oh, hang on a second. What happened to F, right? We left that out. That's one of the notes that's missing between pentatonic, C major pentatonic, and C major. So F is a note we could possibly add into our pentatonic scale that's going to make it more like a Ionian or Aeolian, depending on whether we're talking C major or C minor, or A minor, sorry. Okay, let's keep going then. So we have C, D, E. We've already figured out where we've left out F, G, A, C. Well, there you go again. We've left out B. So really, a pentatonic, C major pentatonic scale is simply just a C major scale with the notes B and F omitted. So if we can go through our pentatonic scale and add all the B's and F's in each octave, we now have turned the C major pentatonic into a C major scale. And if we were thinking of it starting on the A with A minor pentatonic, then if we add the same B and F in, well, now we've turned it into A minor scale or A Aeolian. Okay, keep in mind, Ionian is the modal name for the pure major scale, and Aeolian is the modal name for the pure minor scale, okay, just to keep that straight. So if I start with my A minor scale, or A minor pentatonic, I'm sorry, and find where all the B's and F's are every octave. So in the first octave right here, there's a B here and there's an F here. So if I add those in, I've now turned it into an A minor scale. If I started on C or play it over top of a C chord, I still just have to add the same B and the F in. Or, okay. So really then we can just go in, add the B and the F in wherever, each octave. Wherever we are. And we've turned our pentatonic scale into a major or a minor, or Ionian or Aeolian, however you want to think of it. We're starting to get modal now, okay? And what's going to determine whether this new scale is the Ionian or Aeolian is what chord we're playing it over top of. If we're doing that over an A minor chord, it's going to have the Aeolian sound. If we're doing it over the C major chord, it's going to have the Ionian sound. And I hope that's clear and makes sense, because that's really what modes are all about. Okay. The thing is, though, and this is where I found through my teaching, is when people go and learn these kind of maybe 3-note per string patterns, wherever they may learn them, I've noticed so often that, especially when we're just learning them and we learn in that format, it starts to get very, well, obviously scale-like, but very linear sounding. And it somehow sucks the musicality out of it, unless we really understand how to use them properly, which takes a lot of experience and practice. So I always thought, how can I get people away from just wanting to, just ripping up and down scale patterns in a linear fashion? Well, I thought, let's just stick with the pentatonic scale, because the pentatonic scale doesn't lend itself well to those really kind of fast runs. We tend to... we tend to try to be more musical with it because a lot of them are 2-note per string and whatnot. So what if we said, now that we have that knowledge that we just have to add B's and F's to our pentatonic patterns to sort of turn them into Aeolian or Ionian, what if we attack that from a different standpoint that isn't taught very often? What if we take our pentatonic scales and just add one of those notes in at a time and create brand new patterns, sort of like an A minor pentatonic with the B note added only? Now that's going to serve two purposes. It's going to get us away from jamming all the notes close together, shortening the distance between all the intervals within the scale, which is really what makes them less musical and more predictable. Predictability, I think, is one of the reasons that some people's solos don't sound that good, right? Everybody knows this sequence of notes. The sound of it, anyways, even if they don't understand what it is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, right? We know that particular sequence of notes so well because it's been drilled into our head in Western music, right? So when we learn these patterns and play them so often in that format, we tend to gravitate towards playing them like that when we start to solo with them, or a lot of folks do when they're first beginning. So what if we can avoid that trap by keeping our intervals kind of widened out, like the pentatonic scale? And that's the beauty of the pentatonic scale. The intervals are further apart just when we play them as a scale, so they have a more musical sound to them right away. So what if I said, what if we take this and we say, okay, let's take the A minor pentatonic, or C major, whatever you want to refer to it as, and just simply play a whole set of patterns, playing it only adding the B note in, which sort of moves it into the territory of more Ionian or Aeolian, depending on which tonality we're talking about. The other benefit to that is we really start to train our ear to hear what it sounds like with just that note in there. and it gets less predictable and less like the typical, major scale that we're used to hearing. So here's a couple examples of that. And I'm going to put these up on the screen. I'm also going to have these as a download package available on my website for anybody who's interested in going to grab those as practice material. But you're also free just to watch the video here and use them from here. So here's what I'm getting at. Here was, pattern 1 that I showed in my previous videos for the A minor / C major pentatonic scale. Well, now let's create a pattern just of that, but with all the B notes added in. Okay. Now, the fingering is going to be up to you. If you remember from my previous videos with the pentatonics, from a memory standpoint, I always did them in patterns of 1-3 and 1-4. So this one would have been like 1-3, 1-3, shift back, 1-4, 1-4, shift forward, 1-3, 1-3. Well, in this case, we may do like a 1-3, shift back. There's our B note. 1-2-4, 1-4, 1-3-4. There's our other B. Shift back up to the 3rd position, and then 1-3, 1-3. That's another thing we can do is just take, 3 strings at a time here and practice them. So what this is going to allow you to do is to continue to solo and play around our pentatonic scales, but add that color tone in now when we feel it's musically relevant. And because we'll have practiced these patterns so much, we get our ear tuned into the sound of that. Now, what does adding that note in do to the sound of each chord? Because we're talking about 2 situations, either playing this scale over an A minor chord or over a C major chord, right? So with an A minor, adding the B in is like adding the 9th interval, okay? So it would really take an A minor chord and turn it into an A minor with an added 9th. And that has a very jazzy sound to it. Now, if we were playing it over a C major chord, adding that same B in turns it into C major 7th chord, okay? Okay, so it's going to have a very particular tonality. So the thing to do while we're practicing these new patterns, so here we have this pattern with the B. Play it and get a looper, maybe play it over top of a particular chord to hear the tonality of that note over an A minor chord and then over top of a C major chord, okay? Next scale pattern, the root pattern. The normal pattern would have been 1-4, 1-3, 1-3, 1-3, 1-4, 1-4. Now it would be 1, see, well, here's all of our Bs, right? That we're gonna add into that, there and there. So 1-3-4, 1-3, 1-3 with a stretched out 4, 1-3, 1-4. Sorry. Okay, we move up to our next pattern, which would be. So now we would add a B in here, a B in here, and a B in here. Okay, move up to our next pattern. And again, these are all up on the screen as I'm playing them, and it'll be available on my website as well. So what we're going to do is add these 2 Bs in. And then the final pattern two Bs to add into there. All right, and again, like I talked about in the previous video on pentatonic scales, these are movable patterns. They continue all the way up the neck, right? For instance, this pattern back here that we did is up here. So the same Bs that we added in back here would also be up here. Okay. So that's the scale patterns with the Bs, all right? I hope that was clear. Now we also want to be able to add the Fs in. So we'd go through the same set of patterns. We have our first pentatonic shape that we learned, and we would add in Fs. In this case, the two Fs in that pattern would be right there. And you hear right away it's a different tonality by adding the F in, okay? The next pattern, we're going to have two Fs here and here. All right, next pattern, we're going to have two Fs right here and right here, okay? Next pattern, this one here, we're going to have three Fs. And the final pattern, which is there, we're going to have F, F, and F, three Fs. This one, and this one up here. Okay. You get the idea, I think. So those will all be available for download, and you saw them up on the screen. So really what we want to do now is we want to go through and learn all of our pentatonic scale patterns, which hopefully at this point we already know, and then learn them with Bs. And then learn them with the Fs, right? Now, once we get to know both of those, then we can start amalgamating them into knowing both Bs and Fs whenever we want to put them in. So if we want to create the entire scale pattern, we can do that. What I just played there is one of the patterns for A minor, C major, right? With both Bs and Fs put in. But it's going to seem so much simpler because we have gone through our pentatonic scales. We've added in where all the Bs are. We've added in where all the Fs are. But it's also allowed us to really think pentatonic-like. And just throw those notes in whenever we feel the need. If I'm playing around my pentatonic scale here, I can move around and know instinctively where those Bs and Fs are, know what the tonal quality of them are, and throw them in whenever I need. Okay? So that is really it for now. I know that might still leave some questions as to where to use these, you know. So for now, we're talking about using them over top of individual chords. So in this case, when we use any of these ideas we talked about today over a C major chord, that will be C Ionian or C major scale. If we use it over an A minor chord, it's going to give us the A Aeolian or A minor scale, pure minor scale. Okay, later on in this series, we will talk about how to use these over more complicated chord progressions or chord progressions with more chords, because obviously the more chords that are put into a chord progression, it might define or paint us into a bit of a corner what would be the best ideas for us to play. But for now, it's just a matter of getting these patterns and shapes under our fingers, getting comfortable with them. really comfortable with them, and always thinking back to those pentatonic scales. So like I said, if you haven't mastered those pentatonic scales yet, go back and watch my other videos. A lot of good information. I have downloadable packages on my website, which is all going to be in the description below. And then it'll allow us to add some of these notes in, which can help us to take our pentatonics and just color them up nicely and add some different flavors to them, while all the while still thinking pentatonic, which is the way I tend to really like to think a lot of. So I hope that helps, guys. I hope that's clear. If there's any questions or comments, please leave them in the description below. Next time, we're going to be pairing up 2 other modes, okay? We'll do 2 more videos on this before we've exhausted the 6 modes that we're going to be talking about in this series. Like I said, we're not going to really be touching on Locrian. It's kind of a different tonality than just the major and minor that's the topic for this series. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it if you don't mind. And we'll be back very soon with some more content for you. And hope you enjoyed. And thanks for tuning in. Ciao for now.